Thank you. That was enriching. And thank you, Barbara Morgan, who's behind the scenes, making all this work, making all this content jive. I think Chief Michael made so much connections. I'm just going to let it be the way it is and encourage folks to go to the africancurator.com site when it's up and take it in all again. He made connections that I'm sure a lot of you will have questions. And if you send us those questions, we'll do our best to find answers and help you make your connections. We're going to continue this connection at the language level. This Creole, this Jamaican Patois, and the other French Creoles, the different other what we call pidgin languages. Something about them all where you hear it. You may not understand, you may not hear it fully, but you may understand what they're saying. Why is that so? What is this thing about this Creole that's identified that we speak the Creole, this mix of languages. We speak a specific one in Sierra Leone called Creole now. Others have their own names for it, but there's something about this language, and we're going to call on somebody from Son of the Soil to try and explain to us. Let's appreciate the languages from the Caribbean to Africa. And to do that, we're going to call on Dr. Malcolm Finney. He is currently the interim associate vice president of the Office of Faculty Affairs at the California State University, Long Beach. Prior to this, Dr. Finney served as the director of that center. In his capacity, he developed, facilitated, and supervised professional development programs that address several faculty members' needs, including workshops on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom, faculty learning communities on inclusive, accessible, equity-minded instructional and classroom management strategies, reading groups for new faculty on culturally responsive pedagogy, and on micro-intervention strategies and faculty discussion groups on best mentoring practices in working and interacting with students of diverse background, opportunities, and levels of preparedness. And in the middle of all that, for him to do that, language, which is his strong suite, from which was what he studied, and what he's currently writing on, is key for him to deliver that level of diversity, equity, and inclusion that he's speaking. And so he's going to be using that right now to help us as we try to connect at the language level from the Caribbean to Sierra Leone. Without further ado, Dr. Finney, a professor of the Linguistic Department of the College of Liberal Arts of California State University, Long Beach, is here to make the most meaningful connection at the language level. Dr. Finney, it's yours.
Well, thanks, Adrian, for that marvelous introduction. It sounded like a mouthful. And it's nice to see a few familiar faces here and a lot of new faces. And what I'm going to do today, I'm going to try to do in 15 minutes, maybe what can be done maybe in an entire day. And I'm going to use a presentation to go through this. And so can you see the presentation where it has the title and my name?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so what I'm going to do today is just to talk a little bit about the Creole language, how it started, what the structure is, and what the relationship is between Creole and other Creole languages, and as well as other African languages. So in the field of linguistics, we have a general group of languages called Creole languages, just like we have Romance languages, we have Germanic languages, we have Creole languages, and they go by different names in different parts of the world. So in in Sierra Leone. In fact, that's why we adopted the name Creole rather than Creole, because Creole is more of a general name. And just a brief history, and just a disclaimer here. What I'm going to be talking about, these are some of the models of how these languages started. So there may be individuals that may have other opinions that may overlap with this or maybe a little different from this. So this is, from my perspective, based on most of the readings that I have done. And one popular model is that a lot of Creole languages emerged from a plantation Creole. So the plantation in the Americas then, when slaves from West Africa were transported to the plantations, and the slaves spoke a lot of West African languages. In fact, there's a language group, talking about language group, there was a language group called Kwa languages, KWA. And those languages, although they're different, they have similar structures, although the vocabulary is different. And in the plantation, with slaves coming from different linguistic backgrounds, there was the need for them to communicate, and they spoke languages that others did not understand. So there is a need for a lingua franca. And this is something that is typical of humanity. If there is the need to communicate and there is no one dominant language, sometimes a language will emerge, which would be typically a pidgin, and the pidgin becomes a Creole when the pidgin is used as a native language by the next generation of speakers. So the slaves and the workers in the plantations did not have much verbal interaction with the overseers, with the owners. So there were few opportunities to acquire English. And the language of the slave overseers, that was English, became the target for vocabulary. Most times when you're learning a new language, vocabulary is the first thing, you know, that you pick up. Grammar tends to be very challenging. Pronunciation, of course, is very difficult. So what this model says was that most of these slaves spoke African languages that had similar grammatical structures. So what they did was they learned English words, and they use the English words within the grammatical structures of the African languages they speak. So it seems as if the vocabulary came from English, and some of the grammatical properties came from the African languages. And there are some examples that have been given in the literature to support this perspective. So according to this view, then, there is some evidence that West African languages had some influence on some of the structural properties of Creole languages. Because if you take a lot of Creole languages that borrowed vocabulary from English, there are some structures we find in the Creole languages, including Creole, that we don't find in English, and some of them are traced back to the African languages. Now for Creole and how Creole emerged. So the plantations were like in the southeast of the US in the Carolinas. And after slavery was abolished, the claim was that the plantation Creoles developed in the plantations, and then they were exported to different parts of the world, especially the Caribbean and other parts of the world. For Creole, there are models that suggest that there were people from different parts of the world that were actually were transported to Sierra Leone, and they combined to form, or at least their linguistic knowledge were put together to form what is present-day Creole. And one group was the Nova Scotians, who were freed slaves from the Americas that were resettled in Canada, in Nova Scotia. And if you've been to Canada, you know Canada is a very cold place. And most of the freed slaves there suffered, you know, from economically as well as the weather conditions. And the simplistic solution by the British then who ruled America as well and Canada was, let's send them back where they came from. So there were groups of freed slaves that were transported from Nova Scotia to Freetown in Sierra Leone. There were also others that came later that were transported from Jamaica. Those were the Jamaican Maroons. And the freed slaves in Jamaica also endured economic hardships. And when they protested, the British labeled some of the protesters troublemakers, and they shipped them off to Sierra Leone. Just like in England, when they had people they considered troublemakers, they shipped them off to Australia. So they did the same thing with people who were fighting for their rights in Jamaica. They said, you're troublemaker, you want to cause problems here. So we're going to send you far away from here. And Sierra Leone became the place they were resettled, because Freetown, Sierra Leone, was the headquarters of the British in ruling West Africa, British West Africa then. So they shipped them off to Freetown, which I'm sure most of you know. The name Freetown was so named because it was decided to be a place for freed slaves to be resettled. I didn't mention one because there's belief that they didn't contribute much to the linguistic the emergence of Creole, and that was the Black Poor from England. So there was another group called the Black Poor that were shipped from England to Sierra Leone. And then a final group was the recaptives, sometimes referred to as the liberated Africans. So when slavery was abolished, the slave owners believed it was big business, so they refused to end slavery. They tried to continue slavery by getting slaves from West Africa and ship them to the United States. The British patrolled the West African coast and would intercept slave ships that were on their way to the United States. And since they were not sure where the slaves came from, they knew it was some part of West Africa. When they intercepted the slave ships, they resettled these individuals in Freetown in Sierra Leone, mostly in the rural areas, what we now call the villages of Sierra Leone. And most of these resettled slaves spoke Yoruba, primarily because about that time there was the Yoruba Civil War, and usually the slaves were prisoners of war. And since most of the prisoners of war spoke Yoruba, when they were resettled in Sierra Leone, they brought their languages with them. Not only Yoruba, but languages like Igbo, and from all across West Africa, the West African region, maybe what we now know as maybe from Guinea to the Congo. But Yoruba was the most prominent of these languages. So, and there's another model which a few people have proposed. They argue actually that a Creole language started before slavery along the West African coast because of trade, that there were British traders who settled in along the West African coast. In fact, it was called, I think, the Gold Coast, what is it, GCCE, I think, Gold Coast. It was the region from Guinea all the way maybe to Ghana. And the claim is that the British loved it there. They settled there. They interacted with Africans. They had mixed kids. There were also Portuguese traders. And the offsprings, in fact, that's where the term mulattoes came from Portuguese. And the claim was that because there were British settlers there, and there are people who spoke African languages, the need to communicate resulted in the emergence of a Creole language, and that was a language that was used along the West African coast. So when slaves were transported to the United States, they already spoke a Creole language that they took to the plantations. But that is just another model, that the language started in West Africa and then was transported to the plantations. The first model was that the Creole languages started emerging in the plantations. So to give you some examples of some of the reasons why there is the claim that the African languages had an influence on the Creole languages. So I'll give you a few examples for the rest of this presentation. And yeah, so you have a term in linguistics called calquing or coinage, which is like word for word translations. You don't need to understand the African languages, but if you look at, say, a language like Igbo, the word for greed in Igbo is a combination of two words that's I and big. So have a big I, that means you're greedy. And in Creole, we have big yai. You have in Yoruba, to be persuasive, they combine two words that mean sweet and mouth. And in Creole, if you get sweet mouth, as those of you who speak Creole would understand, that means you can be persuasive. Same thing in another West African language, Ga, where it's combination of sweet and mouth. You look at Yoruba, a word for mermaid is mother of the waters. And in Creole, if you look at the combination for mermaid, it's mother water. So it's as if they use English words, but they put it in African languages, idiomatic expressions. Same thing with sweet yai, sweet peas, which is diabetes, and bigat, which is being stubborn, envy, which is bad at. So in Kikongo, Thai heart is stubborn. So that means sometimes there are slight variations, but you could see that two words are connected to form a new meaning. So these forms are also present in other Creole languages. You look at Shrenan, you look at Jamaican Creole, Trinidadian Creole, and Guyanese Creole, in Gala Creole, you have something similar. Also, you have a word, I don't think I have the African language that had an example, but like to be stubborn, we use in Creole strong ears, trangayes. And in Saramacan, same thing in Jamaica. Well, Jamaican is slightly different, tranga aid. So it's not strong ears, but strong head. Also, in Creole, when we talk about dawn in the morning, we say do clean, do don't clean. That means the outside is clean. And that is the way it is said in a lot of African languages, including Maninka and in Wolof. And we see something similar in Jamaican Creole, as well as in Gala Creole and Guyanese Creole. I mean, Igbo, the word for nostrils is nose hole. And of course, in Creole, we talk about nosul. And you have something similar in Jamaican and in Shrinan. Also, in terms of grammar, you have a phrase that we use in English, like it was John that we saw. It was John that I spoke to. In some West African languages, this is very common, and they use a form that has the pronunciation na or a. So for example, in Creole, we say, na wetin dem dey do. Na means it is what they're doing on the right side of the screen. Or na wetin you been see, or na you we been see. And that means it was you that we saw. On the left side, we have similar structures in African languages. The only difference is that in the African languages, the object comes before the verb. So it was quarto in the African languages. We would say quarto, it was. So that's why the na in the African languages comes after the noun that it introduces. And we see the same thing in other Creole languages, like in Jamaican Creole, me no know away him go. So I don't know, it is where he has gone. In Guyanese Creole, same thing. At which side they live now. So at which side they are living now. Another area where we see some similarities, I didn't give a lot of examples here, but we have examples in West African languages where the word give is used as a preposition, like to mean to. So if you look at Tree, he does work, or for. So he does work for me. In Tree, the translation is he does work, give me. And in Creole, instead of you say he lied to me, we say he lied, give me. That means he lied, give me the lie. And we have something similar in Jamaican Creole. Carry the book, don't give me. So bring the book for me. Another area in grammar where you see some similarities, like in English, where you use the word that, like I told him that I was hungry. In a lot of West African languages, the word for that is equivalent to the verb meaning say. And if you look at the West, so the left, sorry, in Tree, it is a fact that they are ill. If you translate it literally, it means it is a fact, say they are ill. In Eve, I want that I buy, so I want to buy a dress. I want that I buy some dress. They would say, I want, say I buy dress. And in Creole, we have the same. So I think say, they don't go. I think that they have left. So say means that. And in Jamaica, Jamaican Creole, how you know say you don't know him? How do you know that you don't know him? How is it that you don't know him? In Islam, same thing. Peter, I tell him, long me say him I got some virtue. And then Peter told me that he had some money. So the word say, which is borrowed from English, but the concept itself, the way it's used, is more similar to West African languages. And I think the final example that I'll give is when we talk about making comparisons, like John is taller than Mary, where then is the word that is used in English. In West African languages, they tend to use a word that means surpass. So they would say something like John is tall, surpass Mary, or wisdom is better than gold. In Tree, it's wisdom, good, surpass gold. So if we translate this into Creole, we will say wisdom, good, past gold. So it's better than is good, and then surpass. In Yoruba, it's the same thing. The child is cleverer than a tsetse fly. If you translate this, it means the child is clever, surpasses a tsetse fly. And you look at Gullah Creole, he's taller than me is he tall past me. So he tall and then surpass me. I have one more example in Creole. So the Bobo Langa pass them all. So he is taller than them all. So if you do a literal translation, it's the boy long surpass them all. And before I end, just a few examples, because the Creole language and by extension the other Creole languages have borrowed even vocabulary from several languages like Soso, Akara. In some of the West Indian Creoles, they use the word poto poto to mean mud, mut mut. These are like mosquito-like insects. And on the right, you have borrowings that we have from Portuguese and that we have in several Creole languages. And one final thing about the significance of Creole is that there are proposals that Creole was the parent language for, or at least contributed to the development of other Pidgin and Creole languages. Because the British ruled West Africa from Freetown, there were local administrators who were mostly Creole speakers who were transferred to other parts of British West Africa, like the Gambia, the island of Bioko, which used to be called Fernando Po, in Cameroon, in Ghana, and even the Nigerian Pidgin. Some linguists believe that Creole had an influence in the evolution and development of this language. other people from Sierra Leone, mostly the liberated Africans or the recaptives, were also transferred to the West Indies, to the Caribbean, by the British, because there was labor shortage there. And some of the liberated Africans didn't have work in Freetown, so they were transferred there. Okay, so the moral of the story is that Creole is a true mixed language with influence from African and European language. It has an international flavor. And if you believe in the model that Creole was exported to other parts of the world, then Creole may have been the mother of some English-based Creoles. And Creole, like other Creoles, continue to be influenced by African languages and European languages. I've heard a lot of people in Sierra Leone complain that the Creole that is now being used is changing because of influence from speakers of other languages. But I never complain, and I tell people who complain that that's the nature of languages. Languages evolve. Old English is different from present-day English. There are a lot of French words in English because English was used by French speakers who didn't speak English very well. So Creole is going to continue to evolve, and it's going to continue to be influenced by other languages because that is the phenomenon. So as we say in Creole, tenki, which is thank you, and now the word that means that's all, folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Finney. Thank you very much. Again,
call me Malcolm. I'm more used to Malcolm.
All right, Malcolm. And if anybody wants to go over the lesson again, African Curator will have it on their site for you to go. Thank you. So with that, we can challenge, we can take us through a poetry in Creole. And Shoson, I go appreciate that with this enlightenment we don't get from Malcolm. So we have a poet that goes by the name Daughter of the Monsoon, and that's her pseudonym. That's a pseudonym for Dr. Marion Day. She's done a number of poetries and poems, and this one that you're going to listen to is called Awujo.
Awujo by Daughter of the Monsoon. 1 week before we married, and that's traditional Creole way. We married Awujo. It been fine, no? Yes, that's what I say. Me can been sweet. I cook and fine one. They say I for add binge. Hey, my sister Lona boy test me. All man been dress and na so then it shine. Me clothes, safe. Me print are iron and fine. The kitchen full with enough pot and pan. But oh, the smell will come inside there. A fine one. Then the time come for the nyole. Remember the one day we don't go. Papa, brother. But the spirit there with we. We know. Tomorrow, now go time they go so. We don't married now. The time they fly fast. We dey pray say, wetin God don't put together, no man go put asunder. Married Awujo no dey again, but we go remember. Awujo by Daughter of the Monsoon. The week before the wedding, in the traditional Creole way, We had our wedding aujo. It went very well, I must say. My cream was delicious. I did my very best. They said I must do beans as well. In-laws put me to the test. The guests were looking splendid. My print dress was pressed so well. The kitchen had pots everywhere. But oh, what a heavenly smell. The solemn time had come to remember those dead and gone. His dad and brother both, but their spirits still live on. Our anniversary is tomorrow. The years fly by so fast. No more pre-wedding aujos, just many fond memories that last.